All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to share a few details into the work we do as it relates to augmented reality and interactive storytelling. I think we can all agree that the words, the future of interactive journalism is a bold statement, but I'm here to share with you why we believe the future of journalism is more visual, more spatial, and more interactive. My name is Ray Soto. I'm the Senior Director of Emerging Tech at the USA Today Network. And as I said, I'm really thrilled to have been invited back to speak at this year's Mobile Me&You conference. I think it is amazing that this is virtual, and it really comes in line with a lot of the topics that we'll be covering throughout this conference. And my hope is that some of the details we share just reinforces the sense of virtual connecting communities together and how we're leveraging AR. My goal is to, with this presentation, to provide insights, but mostly on how we're using augmented reality to change the way we connect with our communities and how we're converting our audience into tech-savvy readers. I'll do this by sharing details about the work we do, why we do it, and what we've learned, and ultimately to ensure that we're evolving with the technology and with our audience. But before we begin, I want us to be honest with one another in the current state of technology, specifically as it relates to smartphones. And originally I planned to do this when we were going to be in person. So I'm going to do my best to see how much virtual participation we can get through Zoom. So what I'd like to do is ask everyone to grab their devices and honestly just look at it and examine it. I know with my screen share, it's you can't see it too much, but I want everyone to kind of think about the existing capabilities and the features. And one of the things I want everyone to consider is the overall function and design of this device has essentially not changed in over a decade. Now, sure, the internals have, but those are incremental upgrades that essentially serve the same purpose as originally intended. Higher resolution screens, larger screens, better cameras, but nothing really has changed in how we use them, and more importantly, how we deliver, present, and interact with the information. And I want you to ask yourselves this question: what comes next? Has anyone really thought about the future of user experience design as it relates to what happens after the mobile device? So I want you to keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this presentation, and we'll come back to it. But there is one very important technology that is embedded in newer devices that many might not even be aware of. This piece of tech is laying the foundation for the future that extends beyond our screens. And I'm talking about LiDAR. This technology has fundamentally changed the future of interactive design and the way that we must think about spatial storytelling through augmented reality. So a little bit about our team. I'm very fortunate to lead an amazing team of individuals passionate about the future of interactive storytelling. We're former video game developers from companies like EA, NCSoft, and more recently Disney Animation Studios. We never expected to apply our creative passions into journalism, but when we take a step back, we realize this makes sense. And to be honest, I'm surprised there aren't more game developers in journalism. We're tech-focused innovators, passionate storytellers, and accelerators. And while we've been doing this for 8 years, we've been learning quite a bit as it relates to virtual reality, 360-degree video storytelling, and now shifting into augmented reality, in which we are now delivering user experiences into our readers' environments by layering virtual elements into their real-world space. But for us, there are 3 main things. We're user-focused innovators. We're always thinking about the user first. We want to make sure that what we're creating makes sense to them and they find value in it. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're ensuring that what we've learned in the past is not only guiding what we're working on now, but is also setting us up for the future. As I mentioned, we're passionate storytellers. As former video game developers, for us, it's all about interactivity and how we can engage someone in new ways and how we can encourage them to continue to explore and discover the stories through the formats that we're using. And lastly, accelerators. And to me, this is a very, very important one. I'm fortunate to be a part of a small division, an innovation division. And for us, we're always thinking ahead, but at the same time, we're working with all of our partners throughout the company, from local markets to larger national newsrooms. And for us, it's really ensuring that there's an opportunity for us to collaborate and create something new. So for us, it's all about continuing to push ahead and to help folks think of new ways to tell their stories through new formats, and augmented reality is just one of them. But while you've got these great ideas and concepts around what it is that we create, ultimately for us, it's how we're leveraging these technologies and how might best we be able to leverage them with the tools that are available to us. And the way we did that was we evaluated what was available to us to determine the best path forward that provided us with a unique experience that can support a robust catalog of stories. We only had to look at our successes in the past to determine the best path forward. And as I had mentioned, having 8 years experience working within these immersive technologies as it relates to storytelling, we have a really good understanding of what works, what doesn't work, but around a spatial space. And as part of that, we spent several days sharing thoughts on what we wanted our interactive framework to support. There were a lot of tools available. Did we want to stick with, at the time, 3 years ago is when we started, limited web AR capabilities, or did we want to use something that provided us a lot more flexibility to leverage what we know works when it comes to driving engagement and telling stories in a unique way? So for us, it was all about what we can display, the user interaction, and ultimately accessibility. For displaying augmented reality content, we wanted to be able to support not just 3D virtual assets, but at the same time, media, videos, images, and audio. And for us, audio is very, very important. We also wanted to be able to support custom animations and complex logic. And what that means is essentially visual effects, triggering animations based on the user's location or an actual, tappable UI element. And at the same time, for breaking news type content, we want to be able to support real-time text and live video feeds as well. But as that part of that package, we also need to make sure that the user interaction supports all of that. So we want to support interactive schemes that folks are already familiar with. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to make this feel like a very natural experience. Tapping, swiping, device location and proximity is very big for us, especially when you consider folks are already using and familiar with AR capabilities on Pokemon Go. And I know that's something that folks kind of reference back, but it really did change the dynamic of what might be possible, especially when you consider the USA Today network. We're such a large network of news markets that we want to be able to deliver unique content to those readers and those communities that resonate with them. And we do that through geolocation. Gaze detection, haptic feedback, nothing too new there. But for us, the biggest one was also accessibility. We wanted to make this as seamless as possible for someone to not only access the content, but ensure that they don't have to worry about the technology and what might not be working, so they can focus on the story itself. So for us, embedding the Unity game engine into our native apps provided that. Essentially, it's a low-level code. It's a robust game engine, but it's almost like loading a web page. As soon as they see it, they tap on it, they're able to access it almost instantly. So knowing that all the code is on the user's devices, they don't have to download anything except for the assets that make up that interactive. So it's a really seamless user experience. And what is exciting for me is we were able to integrate this into all our native apps. So essentially we have a large network of AR capable devices across several different markets. But while we've got a robust toolbox, it really does come down to what is it that we do with those tools and how do we leverage them. And ultimately for us, we wanted to make sure that we were creating impact. So through the development of the immersive stories over the past several years, we've identified 4 keys to creating impact: visuals, interactivity, sound, and pacing. So it's really important for us that we keep users' attention. So we need to have purpose behind what we're displaying. We have to go beyond just something to look at. We kind of take a step back and we answer questions, or we ask ourselves questions. Why is this being surfaced? And how are we guiding the user to look at what we want them to see? We don't want them to feel as if they're lost within a virtual space. So visuals are very purposeful in the way that we design them. Then interactivity. We must give them the opportunities to be a part of the experience. We have to find ways for them to move, inspect, and be curious. Are we invoking curiosity? And more importantly, have we created an interactive experience that drives the engagement rather than kind of gets in the way? And sound is a really important for us as well. While most AR experiences that you might find is a static 3D object, maybe you'll see some animations. For us, sound really helps drive that story and reinforces it through a spatial experience. So we use sound for instruction, we use it to educate, and ultimately to help build the ambiance of the story that we're building. Ultimately, are we using audio to guide the user? How can we leverage the sound to enhance the sense of place? And through all of that, it really does come down to pacing. We don't want our users to linger too long. We want to try and find ways to transition from scene to keep their attention without abandoning them. I mean, do we have a good balance between user engagement with experience versus passively watching? You know, with AR, there's a purpose there. When someone taps on our thumbnail to engage with a story, we value that, and we want to respect the time that they've given us to interact with a story in a different way. And ultimately, as it comes down with the pacing, we have to make sure we have clear beats as well. It serves as a way to reset the user's attention. Something goes for too long without anything happening, ultimately folks start to drop out. So for us, based on what we've learned, we create these measurable beats of interactivity that folks feel as if, okay, I've seen this, oh, here's something else, and it resets that attention span. So for us, we've noticed that there's strong engagement by leveraging all of these together to create that nice, strong pacing. But we'll come back to these later. And you know what I want to do is now talk about a few projects so you can see some of these themes running across them. And the first one I'll talk about is 1619. During the summer of 2019, we were part of a large group supporting a interactive component of the USA Today's 1619 editorial package. Working closely with our colleagues and amazing partners across several departments, we recognize a unique opportunity to leverage our toolbox to immerse readers into a story like we've never done before. Our goal was to have our users step into a virtual representation of a privateer ship that brought the first enslaved Africans to America. And it was very important for us to treat this story with reverence and authenticity. And we worked closely with reporters and historians to develop the immersive experience that felt more like in a museum installation that also informed. The piece included spatial audio, interactivity. It included, a story that was written by a best-selling author, narrated by, well-known African-American poet Tamara Winfrey Harris. And there was also custom art created by well-known Hampton, Virginia artist Richard Press Sr. And additionally, it was so important for us that we were working closely with ship experts at the Hampton History Museum. This is 400 years ago, we didn't necessarily know the type of ship. We see a lot of illustrations of the enslaved being brought over across the Middle Passage. And ultimately, we thought it was a much larger ship, but working with a ship historian, we learned through court records that it was actually a much smaller ship, that it was specifically a Dutch flute. So with that, we're able to get lots of reference materials, renderings, and fortunately there was already something that was built that we could leverage and take photos of to help guide the creation of this experience. But as I mentioned, those pillars of creating impact with visuals, interactivity, pacing, and sound, we created a story that was powerful without being too violent, because again, we wanted folks to really understand the story of the first enslaved coming, and we felt very, very proud of what we created. And here is a preview. I hope the audio comes through.
Our feet blistered and bleeding, we finally arrived at the port of Rwanda and gaze upon a beast sitting in the sea. It is the largest ship we have ever seen, and we marvel at the sight. No sooner than we feel the breeze upon our faces, do they grab us.
That was just a short segment. And what was an interesting challenge for us is knowing that we had a large space that a user could walk in. We wanted them to feel truly immersed. So we had spatial audio components. We had audio that was captured for us by one of our videographers who went to Angola. So the sounds you hear of the beach were captured on the beach there. You have birds, you've got some of the water that's lapping up against the side of the ship. So there are a lot of audio components that we pulled together and kind of engineered this experience that folks felt as if they're stepping into the bow of the ship. Our next project was also another powerful one that we created with our investigative team. And this one focused on an investigation into a contractor in which a deal went wrong working with known Taliban leaders. And I believe it'll trigger, so I will play this and see if it works. Click too many times.
This is Azizabad, Afghanistan, population 1500. On August 22nd, 2008, this was the site of an American ground operation and airstrike. The target, a Taliban commander. Military officials would tout the mission as a major success. It wasn't. The Taliban commander escaped, and the operation turned out to be one of the deadliest civilian casualty events of the Afghan war. This is a story of lies, spies, and a series of military intelligence failures that ended in tragedy. A key player in it all is a company called G4S, the largest private security employer in the world.
So that's, again, just another small segment. It's the intro sequence of this particular story. And this was published in late 2019. And as I mentioned, Show of Force tells the story of a military mission to capture Taliban leaders that turned tragic when a gunship decimated a tiny village in Azizabad, ultimately killing dozens of Afghan children. At the center of it all was the Pentagon subcontractor Armor Group, which is a subsidiary of the global security giant G4S. And we had worked very closely with Brett Murphy, who was the investigative reporter who actually traveled to Afghanistan and interviewed government officials, villagers, and former company employees. And he was able to piece together this timeline of strategic failures that led to this tragedy. And similar to what we did with 1619, we really embedded ourselves into the project. We were definitely presented us with unique challenges, but we spent months researching with our investigations team, sifting through documents, photographs, audio, video, testimonials, and really putting together this visual timeline of introducing all the folks involved in their relationships and ultimately displaying kind of how things unfolded and the aftermath as it related to the specific one. So the way that we leverage augmented reality just kind of goes beyond the fun. We want to make sure that we find ways in which we leverage the platform to its strength to tell these stories in new ways that folks can come back to, and at the same time ensure that provide them opportunities to explore and discover the story. So something as complex as these investigation pieces work very, very well for us. And this is just one example that we've created. But I feel like I can't talk about what we've been working on without addressing the pandemic. And that was definitely, like most, a very interesting challenge and something that we had not expected. And specifically what I mean by that is, as news was breaking of the spread of the virus and folks starting to shut in, remote work, and on from there, within 1 week, on a Monday or Tuesday, we made the call, we're all going remote work. By Wednesday, I had an entire calendar of content I was going to work on throughout the year. It got pared down to about half. Then all of a sudden by Friday, we had nothing to work on because we had to cancel everything. So we returned the following Monday and we realized, here's an idea. Let's start creating COVID-related content. We can do this rapidly. It'll be top of mind, and we could do fun ways to inform folks as far as how to approach social distancing challenges in an interactive game-like format. And what you see on the left here is a fun little game that we created called Flatten the Curve. And what this is almost like a bird's eye view of a day in the life of an individual. And you are challenged with a series of scenarios that you could pick and choose if you wanted to go for takeout. What happens if you go to visit a neighbor? And you're presented with a choice. And one is obviously better than the other. And what we do is we tally up the score and we present to you how safe you were. And it was all guided by the information we had from the CDC at the time. And it was a fun way for us to inform our users. And as more details of the COVID virus started to come out, we also created an interactive that displayed particle effects and aerosols and how they travel. And there was a lot of impact there. And we leveraged augmented reality to show that these particles, aerosols, could travel quite a long distance. And I believe it was up to about 20 feet if somebody were to sneeze, and how the dispersal of those aerosols in a cloud effect was guided by a scientist that we were working with to ensure that there was represented as authentically as possible. So these two pieces released at the right time. It was a fun project to work on, but specifically as it relates to the Flatten the Curve, it was a really big surprise for us. The project was developed, conceptualized, produced, and developed within about 5 days. It was also one of our most popular pieces that we had released last year. I mean, 4.3 million seconds of engagement, 7.6 million impressions. And while numbers are great, this is telling us a really interesting story when you compare it to the engagement that we were getting before. And folks were seeking this type of content. They were starting to understand what augmented reality is, and the format in which we presented it was providing that value. And ultimately, what we noticed is a record engagement for us in 2020. We had released 8 experiences last year, but for me, the key metric that shows us that we're heading down the right direction is the average engagement time per user. At 125 seconds each is phenomenal. And when you compare the view counts that we got before and what we were seeing in 2020, I mean, massive jumps at almost 300% in view counts. The impression rates, very, very strong. And to kind of take a step back, as I mentioned before, this is telling us an interesting story that while most folks are shut in, through this early phases of the pandemic, that our readers understood exactly what we have now. They're coming back to it, and through a regular cadence of content, they know what to expect, and they're starting to engage with it in different ways. They're starting to understand the value it provides, and they're looking forward to more of those types of stories. And with what we ended up learning last year, we applied it to what we started developing this year. And I think everyone's very familiar with what happened on January 6th. Like you, all of us, we were glued to our screens, getting information. And what we ended up doing is we came back the following day, the morning of the 7th. We identified an opportunity to create a lightweight AR experience that was very timely. It was definitely relevant to our audiences and provided a unique perspective into, illustrating and showing where some of the most iconic photos that were being displayed across, news sites, where they had happened. And what we ended up doing was we worked very closely with our photographers and several reporters to ensure that we knew exactly where these photos were being taken, providing context with them as well. So there's almost this narrative flow across this photo gallery that shows you the place where these had occurred. And this project took less than 8 hours to put together. Most of the time was spent just making sure that we could verify the locations of these photos based on the maps that we had. And we published it. And this is still our most popular piece that we've created so far this year. Strong engagement, but it also tells us that our development pipelines are so strong that we can meet news events in near real time. Granted, it's a day later, but as information started to come around, we started to recognize that there's an opportunity there to do something a bit different that still informed users in a way that they can understand and still, as I keep mentioning, do find value in this. So it was a really exciting opportunity for us. But at the same time, just based on the engagement, our users are telling us a story that they understand this. So that was fantastic. And a more recent project that we had done was to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Attica Uprising. And this particular project was an interesting one. And the reason I'm bringing it up is we also support local stories as well. And our team in Rochester had reached out to us, and they had pitched the idea of an augmented reality experience. So in the past, it's always been us kind of promoting and advocating and saying, okay, this could be a great story. The reporters at Rochester identified AR as a good component to their package. And what was really interesting for this particular one is, as we were working with our reporters, we had opportunities to sit in on interviews with folks who were there, whether they were observers or if they were inmates or guards and on from there. So there was this opportunity to really embed ourselves within the reporting and ultimately just to help guide the direction that we wanted to take this in. And what we quickly identified is, with all this information, that we can show folks how things had happened, and specifically the day of the uprising and several days afterwards, and kind of the tail end and what ended up occurring after the fact. So we embedded interactive elements to tappable annotations that would surface photos, audio, and even some data visualizations as well. So that was a really exciting opportunity for us to be able to put this package together, but at the same time, to be able to release this to so many different markets all at once. And what I mean by that is through all of the apps in the New York region and USA Today. So it was really helped kind of reinforce that not just these big stories, but these national stories can really kind of bubble up nationally as well and still really resonate with our audiences. But So, what did we learn through all of this, and specifically in 2020? With what you see here, these are just three captures, three segments. The first bit that you see is the engagement that we saw for the Capitol project. Then you've got the Mars project afterwards, and then you've got a vaccine project following that. And it was nice to see these strong bumps every time that we were pushing out new content. And for us, it's letting us know that our readers have become tech savvy. And I know I keep going back to this, but I do think it's very important to mention that this type of content, this technology is for everyone. Ultimately, it's great to get to the younger demographic in there, but we also don't want to alienate our existing and older readers as well. And they understand this technology, which is fantastic. So we know that we're reaching a broad audience and we're driving repeat visits. We've got these consistent bumps throughout the entire year when we release new projects. Obviously, I would like to see folks, getting more traction, going larger and larger, but ultimately it's nice to see that we've got these consistent bumps, and with these really large stories like the January 6th Capitol Uprising or Capitol riots, we see that strong bump, and we're starting to continue to see that throughout the rest of this year. And provides value. I think that's a really big one to mention as well. We know that we're building a dedicated audience that invests in our product, and we want to make sure that we respect that as much as we can. And more recently, last month, as a matter of fact, we released a premium sports product called USA Today Sports Plus. And the reason I want to bring this one up, while it's not as serious as some of the investigative projects, 1619 show forcing on from there, that we understood that through research and data-driven decisions, they were guiding our new opportunities in AR. We identified that sports fans are seeking unique content, exclusive experiences, and premium interactives. And what's great is they're willing to pay for these as well. So our first AR sports story that we developed celebrates the fans. We were working closely with our marketing team, and we identified one fan from each of our markets that we soft launched the product to. And each fan is represented virtually, and they are able to share in their own words through audio that the importance of being a part of their team, to celebrate their team. And you really get to meet them and kind of learn more about their passions. And what is really interesting for us, when you compare the engagement time that we've been seeing for our standard AR content within USA Today and other news apps at about 126 seconds per user, here we're seeing much, much stronger. I mean, our peak engagement time so far was the second day of launch at 5 minutes and 26 seconds, which is phenomenal. I mean, I think that would be something that we would all kill for. But again, that's letting us know that the sports demographic, this is the right content for them, and we're excited to continue to push them. So, what is some of my advice to you? We're fortunate that we do have the support to continue to push ahead when it comes to augmented reality. And through each of our pieces, there are a lot of themes that we're able to pull together that I think really will resonate with other teams who are interested in either exploring AR or at the same time, we're already developing pipelines to support immersive storytelling. For us, it's really important that you build a cross-divisional team. Reporters are more than just a resource. Make them a part of your team. Include passionate and creative developers that might not have the answers, but are eager to solve the problems. You have to really understand the story, embed yourselves in there. The team and I, while we are not traditional journalists, we do understand that it's very important for us to get to know the story as much as possible, especially as we're creating these interactives. It helps identify those opportunities that we might not have identified in the first place. It's imperative to know what's possible with the tools you have, so you have to develop a solid plan. This happens early and sometimes even before you start creating your story, so it's important to be transparent and to update often. Never, ever hesitate to explore. And what I mean specifically by that is don't limit yourselves. If you have an idea, find opportunities to experiment. Fail, I think, is an important part of our role as well, but at least it helps inform us on what might be possible moving forward. And lastly, it's really important to involve with the technology and your audience. So as I start to near the end of this presentation, I want to go back to the first question that I had asked, what comes next? My hope is that our work inspires you to explore and discover new opportunities through AR that you might not have considered before. Through the advancements of augmented reality on mobile devices, look at the complete technology landscape to better understand the future of interactive journalism and its opportunities. And I'm talking about photogrammetry, drones, volumetric video, audio is very important, wearables. I think if you look at the complete package, you can kind of see where things are starting to move forward. You know, consider this, that our phone in its current design is not the future. While we can look at the technological breadcrumbs of these advancements, I think we can make an informed prediction. But ultimately, I can tell you, with certainty, I can definitely tell you what is coming up next. I can tell you that the future of interactive journalism is immersive, interactive, and 3D. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ray. So now we're going to start our Q&A, and actually, Ian, if we can unmute you, you can start.
Thank you. Ray, I was very curious about how USA Today plans to integrate hosts or journalists into a potentially live spatial experience.
Yeah, one of the things I'm excited about, there was recently 8i had just developed and shown a live volumetric video rendering. And as a volumetric video, there's definitely requires, large bandwidth, large resources from a phone. But I think the closest that we can come to right now would be live streaming audio, live, updated visualizations, which we have the tools to support. We just haven't moved to that direction yet. But we do have a lot of interest there. So what we're trying to do is leverage what we know works to be able to tell stories using augmented reality as a live presentation. But when it comes to pulling someone live as a 3D hologram, I think the tools are still very early on. But 8i and 8th Wall just shared some exciting advancements. I think it was earlier this week, as a matter of fact.
Thanks. I'm actually more curious around the notion of having just a live host experience. Not that they have some type of avatar, but that they're using a spatial experience to augment a live broadcast. Is there a plan for that?
Okay. Yeah, so for live broadcast, we have not done that yet. A lot of that stuff is, kind of pre-canned, almost green screen using LiDAR in the Unreal Engine. With what we're seeing with, let's say, the Weather Channel, where they do presentations with, let's say, what can happen with, flooding, tornadoes, and on from there. Those are really exciting ways to illustrate to the user as far as what, or the viewer, what they could expect. We personally have not done any. We've done some lightweight experiments probably about 3 years ago using VR as a way to pull things together. But as far as the live broadcast side of things go, I think there are a lot of tools that are already available, and definitely something that our video team is also interested in exploring. So unfortunately, I don't have too much experience with that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
That'd be great. So while we're waiting for more questions, just to encourage you guys to raise your hand if you have any additional questions, or please put them in chat. But meanwhile, Ray, what do you think some of the biggest challenges, especially, we're in a small newsroom, a nonprofit newsroom. So how could we mimic some, really cool things like this?
What I think is really exciting now is the dust has settled, and the tools that are available now are readily accessible to almost anyone, and a lot of them are free as well. What I would encourage folks to do is to essentially play. You could look at, if you wanted to start off with, let's say, Instagram filters and using their platform Spark AR. If you look at Snapchat and their Lens Studio, they're all free, and there are a lot of resources available for folks to learn as far as how to create a basic piece that might include a 3D object and a piece of audio. You could definitely go much more interactive with, let's say, Unity, which becomes a lot more robust, which is, a game engine. But what's great is there are so many resources available now that weren't available even just 3 years ago. I think we're starting to see, as I mentioned before, those breadcrumbs being laid out. And it's fantastic to see so many creatives just putting things together and getting it out there just to see what ends up happening. So for smaller newsrooms, what I would recommend is, start with tools that are readily available, Instagram, Snapchat. Unity is free right now. And there are a lot of plug and play opportunities that folks might not have even considered. Another good option can be going to a platform called Sketchfab. It's free. It's a web 3D model viewer, but you can also view it via AR as well. So that's an opportunity to pull together a 3D asset, add some annotations, maybe an audio bit, and essentially hitting play. So there are ways that folks can start to experiment with these free tools, and as maybe more resources become available, kind of scale up from there. But there are very easy ways to get in with low barriers of entry.
Thanks. What do you think then are some challenges to be aware of? I always personally feel like the simplest tool is the best tool to maybe tell the story, and telling the story not just for the sake of the technology, but how does this technology contribute to the story? But obviously this seems like it could be a lot of fun to do as well, clearly a lot of work. But what would be some challenges that maybe something you would warn us against?
I think one of the big challenges for us is authenticity. When you consider that a lot of this is virtual representations, it's important that we have to make sure that we are faithful to the story that we're telling, and at the same time that we are representing everything as authentically as possible. It's really easy to find yourselves going down this uncanny valley of creativity for the sake of, because you can. And as journalists, that's definitely not the way you want to go. So you have to be very much respectful of it. And I think that's one of the big things to consider. At the same time, it's almost a little bit of user experience design. I think you kind of see that as a theme through the presentation, that we're very conscious as far as the decisions we make as it relates to making sure our users understand what is going on. And at the same time, they feel as if they're engaging and driving the story through opportunities of exploration. And the reason I bring that up is you have to make sure that a user understands exactly what they're looking at and why they're looking at it. And I think that becomes a bit of a challenge as well. We've failed at that on a few of our earlier projects where we would show, let's say, a photogrammetry model of an individual. And it's like, well, why are you surfacing this? Why is this better in AR as opposed to a more traditional format, maybe even just a video? But what we do is we approach each of our projects by asking ourselves those questions. Is this better in AR? Is this better as a video, as a long form story, and on from there? So really that opportunity to kind of I would say that's one of the biggest challenges as well.
Great. Anybody have any questions? Please do raise your hand. There is a question in the chat. What is the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality? Good question, Maddie.
Yeah, it's a great question. Virtual reality is a way here's the way that I look at it. Virtual reality puts someone in a place. Augmented reality brings the place to someone. So when you put on a headset, you are putting someone in an immersive environment, in an immersive experience. With augmented reality, while they're using their devices, you're putting virtual elements into their environments, whether it's their living room, maybe their office, and on from there. So slight differences between the two. At the same time, with virtual reality, you have to make sure that you've got someone within that experience 100% of the time. I mean, it's a headset-driven experience. With AR, it's we're competing with a lot of other competing for attention when it comes to other apps and notifications on from there. So for us, it's really all about making sure that we keep things nice, tight, and as tight as possible. So the difference is VR, you take someone somewhere. AR, you bring the place to them. See a question.
Next question. Yeah, can you speak a bit more about how you figure out if the users understand the experience? How do you test this in some of the rapid deployments?
Yeah, it's another great question. And we've made quite a few adjustments over the past years when it comes to our overall user experience and specifically the onboarding side of things. We've got data that shows us the user journey from someone who views the thumbnail, who taps on the thumbnail, and where they drop off. So early on, you could see high impression rates when it comes to actually viewing the thumbnail as they're scrolling by. Then you'll see, let's say, a fraction of those people get into and actually tap the experience. And what was interesting for us is when you compare when we first integrated augmented reality in 2018, we saw this steep drop in people who would not give permissions for USA Today app to use their camera. And I completely understand why, especially for folks who weren't too familiar with what augmented reality is. So that was an opportunity for us to make an update. And we started to see things slowly change, especially last year. But even more recently, when we updated our onboarding sequence, we're more transparent and folks understand what this is and why we're asking for access to it. But as it goes through the experience itself, let's say the actual interactive story, we're able to follow that user journey. And over the years, with AR, folks don't want to feel as if this is a passive experience. They want to feel as if they're the ones who are driving this. They want the flexibility to, and I use these words all the time, but explore and discover. And we're able to know that by ensuring that there is that flexibility to provide the user that opportunity to essentially walk around. So we have all these data points to follow the user journey, but I think our biggest pain point early on was that onboarding sequence and asking for permissions for the camera. But now as it relates to the story, we know that something that is definitely interactive, lots of audio is helpful for us, but a tight narrative experience, about 3 to 5 minutes, has always been worked very, very well for us.
I have a quick question, just to give everyone a chance to kind of catch their breath for a second. You may have said this and perhaps I've missed it, but what do you production timeline from like concept to deployment?
Yeah, it really varies. It varies. The January 6th project was developed within about 8 hours, but I would say typically what we aim for is anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks per project. And the 2-week project is something that maybe is a partnership with our graphics team or something that we might conceptualize, say, hey, we can put something together. But our long form stories, those investigative pieces, 1619, Show of Force, those were up to about 3 months each. And that's because it was such a complex story that required a lot of storyboarding. Conceptualization only gets you so far, but now we have to prove it out through storyboarding. We do treat this almost like other forms of storytelling. We lay it out, we discuss it, we identify those opportunities for interaction. What pieces might we be able to layer on, whether it's audio, photos, and on from there. So it does depend, but I would say on average, and I know it's a pretty wide range from 2 to 6 weeks, but some of them can be as quick as a day.
Do you have any other questions? Anyone raised your hand? Pop in the chat there. Aha, Ian again. Go for it, Ian.
I have an appointment, so I'm going to take advantage of all the time I have. Ray, I was curious about, you mentioned accessibility. Is part of the workflow, does that enable users that do not have LiDAR or even AR capable phones to still experience an alternative, maybe browser-based experience? And how do you work that through?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our AR content only surfaces on devices that are AR capable. For those that do not, we essentially work up with our graphics team or our storytelling studio to develop a presentation that still leverages those 3D assets in a different way. So think of it as the full interactive immersive experience as the premium experience, and then you've got the lightweight version that is still just as powerful on a more traditional format. The other bit for us as well is when it comes to accessibility, everything that we develop has subtitles. We know, it's a small thing, but it's very important to us that, for the hearing impaired, we want to make sure that we at least surface that for those. So, accessibility goes in different forms as well. So another one is, let's say for those who might be, disabled and can't move in a wide open space. With AR, it's very easy to create this large walking environment, but what can we create that is a little bit more centered, so for folks who might be disabled can still engage with the content by looking around and tapping on elements. So we approach things a little bit differently for each of those, but as far as the format and what might be available for those who do not have AR capable phones, we do create another form of presentation.
Thank you.
Gary, I think Gary has his hand raised. All right.
Gary has his hand raised. That's right. Ray, I'm wondering what you find about audience engagement from augmented reality pieces versus, regular pieces? Is there a difference, and is there a greater not only involvement by the user, but then ultimately loyalty to USA Today?
Yeah, man, so many great questions. This is fantastic. So what we're noticing with engagement is when it comes to more traditional forms of presentations, whether it's a long form story, whether it's a video, our engagement times are just as strong and sometimes if not stronger, but our overall view counts are much lower than you might find for other ones. And that's just because of folks, ours is very much native app based. But for us, we recognize that as a step forward of what might be coming. So, it's one of those things where I don't want to necessarily compare them, but, as it relates to what we're seeing from engagement, view counts, and total time spent, I think for us, the big thing that is exciting is the overall average time spent per user. I mean, when you look at, let's say, super fans at 5 minutes per user, that's phenomenal. So it's one of those things where I wouldn't necessarily compare it to page depth, time spent, but it's just part of the package. So I would say that I wouldn't replace one for the other. I mean, good storytelling is good storytelling, no matter which format you go in. But with what we've been seeing with augmented reality, we're noticing that folks are sticking with this, and it's been fantastic to see.
Another question here from Zach. You mentioned working with local newsrooms. I'd imagine they don't have all the skill sets that your team does. That's true. USA Today is pretty stellar. How do you get them to understand what's possible?
My recommendation would be for, while we are a very large network, small and medium and large newsrooms, ultimately, yes, there's a resource for them to reach out to us. But for a small newsroom who is interested in exploring these types of experiences, I would encourage them to reach out to folks like us, ask questions. But there's so many resources available now. I mean, even through O&A as an example, Journalism 360, they've got some tutorials on there. They've got some guidance, but there are so many great tools that while no one might have, let's say, the full skill set for the types of stories that we create, we've done some AR filters through Instagram, which are pretty straightforward. There are tools like photogrammetry within native phones now, or within native devices, that allow folks to capture and render real world objects by leveraging LiDAR that's embedded within their phone. So there are a lot of tools available now, and I think it's really just coming down to experimenting. And yeah, there's so many resources available now that I would just, seek them out. And I think there's a lot there that'll be available for folks who are eager to just get in.
Another question from Samuel. Ray, what was your schooling career progression that led you to your current place with USA Today?
This is, I definitely have an interesting journey. I feel like I'm in my, I guess you could say, third chapter of my career book. I started off, I was working for the government. I was a computer scientist, I guess you could say. But I'd always had a passion for video games, and I quit that and started studying game design and got into 3D art and creation. And as it relates to USA Today, it's actually a bit of a funny story. So the studio I had been working at in video games had shut down, and shutdowns in the gaming industry are very, very common. So I thought nothing of it, and I thought to myself, okay, I'll probably end up moving to California again to work at a studio out there. So I'd given myself about a few weeks off, and I was interviewing for a position that I was really excited about for an art directing position. And I ended up getting a phone call from Gannett, which is USA Today's parent company. And I had not applied for a job. Someone gave them my phone number, and on the phone call, they had asked me a very simple question, asked me, do I know how to do virtual reality? And I had never heard of Gannett. I was actually mispronouncing. I was calling Gannett, embarrassingly enough. I didn't know specifically what they were asking, but I thought, let me go in and at least hear a little bit more about what they're proposing. And I'll never forget walking into this very corporate, large glass building, thinking to myself, I will never work here, but let me just hear them out. And I walk in and I see the logos for USA Today, and immediately it started to hit me. I was like, wait a minute. They want to leverage VR to create stories, journalism stories. And the very first conversation I had was with my good friend Dan Pacheco, who's speaking later. And he was telling me his vision and the opportunities. And I was so inspired that I turned down the job I was looking to go back into the video game industry 3 times. And I stuck with USA Today. And I look back, it would have been my dream project. I would have been art directing a Star Wars project, but I've had so much fun working within this space and really driving change and trying to figure out what might come next as it applies to journalism.
Me. Well, thank you so much, Ray. That's really, I use the word, my favorite word in journalism, fun. I really believe this is such a fun industry. It looks like we are wrapping up our session. A couple of quick notices. Number one, we'll have Mitra Kalita starting in 15 minutes in the next breakout room. So feel free to join us there. Feel free to hang out with Ray. And a reminder for those who would like to come to tomorrow's session, Saturday sessions will include a drawing each session for $50 gift card for Starbucks. You can get a latte Trenta coffee with 3 shots. And one last question, Ray, and for those of you who are still here, please do answer this in the chat. Would you rather team up with Wonder Woman or Captain Marvel? You're muted. I'm sorry, Ray.
I know that one like the back of my hand. Captain Marvel all the way. I grew up a military brat, so I grew up on an Air Force base, and watching Captain Marvel on the screen when she was flying an F-16, which was the fighter jet I wanted to pilot when I was a kid. I was like, if I had seen this when I was a kid, I would want to be her. So I would say Captain Marvel all the way.
All right. Well, Ray, your presentation was marvelous. And yes, I am a little bit corny with 3 espresso shots. So feel free to hang out, those who are here to continue some conversations. We will be setting up for Mitra's talk here shortly. And we appreciate everyone's attendance this morning, so bright and early. Love to see all this great stuff. Thank you so much, Ray. This has been terrific. Gary, do you have anything to add or ask or do?
No, I'm good. So if you want to, like Pam said, stay here and chat. You can go back to the main lobby and chat, or you can go directly into Mitra's room, and she'll be setting up and getting ready to go at 15 after. Coolness, everybody. Thanks. Great session, Ray.
Bye. Thanks again, Ray. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.